Truck drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Story 1. Not a truck driver, but once I was driving through the Canadian Rockies late at night and had just passed through a small town. So I'm driving through the pitch black and I need to stop to pee and have a smoke. But because it's so dark, I missed the last rest. Stop for the next while. No problem. The highway is completely deserted, so I pull to the side of the road, have my pee, while staring out into the dark, and then light up a cigarette and stand by my car. As I'm standing there, I see the figure of a man just walking out of the tree line. I'm miles from civilization, patchy cell service, and there isn't a soul on the road. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, and maybe it was a deer, but nope, this was a man. So I calmly walk back to the driver's door and get in, locking the doors behind me. I'm keeping my eye on this guy as I nervously smoke and have my car in drive, ready to peel out, but for some reason, I just stay put. The guy walks right up to my passenger door and knocks on the window. I crack the window and I ask what's up. He replies to me in a very, very serious tone, "I need you to call the cops." I cautiously ask why, and he tells me he had gone out into the woods to kill himself, but he couldn't go through with it because he had thought of his daughters right before he was about to do it. I call the cops, while the guy quietly crees outside. He had a kitchen knife that he was gonna use on himself, so I stayed in the car and advised him to maybe leave the knife on the ground before the cops arrived. The cops came and got him, but before they left with him, I gave him a solid heart-to-heart and wished him well. I still think about him. I hope he was able to turn things around. Story 2. I used to work as a road train driver in the Gascoyne region of outback Western Australia. A lot of black dog phenomena on the night shift. I would see all kinds of things appear in the shadows because of fatigue, or 3 goats would change into some sort of beast. One time I swear I nearly ran over a corgi, which would be astronomical odds. There is one in the wild in this part of the outback. One night I pulled up to sleep, let the engine run cold for 10 minutes, then tried to sleep. I woke up to noises, not voices, but some sort of order to the noises, and the whole cab of the truck was shaking. I looked in the mirror and saw shadows around the vehicle. I turned the truck on, and every single light attached to the thing, and hastily continued my run to the port. This is a big cab that would have taken a lot to move. I rationalize it as being windy, some goats around the truck, and fatigue. Either way scared the hell out of me, and I never slept on the night shift again. Story 17, I've got a few. Being stalked by, my gut says a skinwalker outside of Cedar City, but I've told that one elsewhere on Reddit. One of the worst was when I was parked at a dirt turnout in the Arizona desert, between Cameron and Page for the night. This is out in Navajo country, I believe. At about 2 a.m. I woke up to scratching at the window of my sleeper, which went on for about 15 minutes. I'm sitting there in the dark, scared to death, wondering what the hell was happening with my Bowie knife in my hand. After it ended, I waited another 15 minutes or so before I opened my curtain and looked out the windows. Couldn't see anything outside, and I was still the only one parked there. Got out the next morning, and all I found were some footprints coming to the truck, and eventually walking back into the desert. Haven't parked there since, but I always stop at a small truck stop in Cameron now. Story 18, Reno, Nevada. A place on the north side of town, way off the freeway towards an old military road. I got there early at like 1 a.m. They didn't open till 6 a.m. The facility was closed, so no one was around, and I just pulled into the lot and parked off to the side. So I went to sleep and was woken shortly after by someone knocking on the door window, firmly to the point the truck shook. I jump out of bed thinking they are there already and want to offload me early. I get to the door and no one is there, so I step down thinking they are behind the trailer looking at the door seal or something. No one was around. I looked under the truck and around, absolutely no one. No wind or bad weather, not another person around. I jumped in the truck and pulled out of there as fast as I could and went and parked in a nearby truck stop. Still can't explain it. I mean, I guess I can just imagine the sound, but the truck shaking was definitely real, so I don't know. Story 15. My father told me this story maybe 1,000 times. My family, as well as a couple of uncles and my oldest cousin, went on a trip from Mexico City to Acapulco when I was barely a year old. Back home in the middle of the night. Ah, the good old days when you could travel at night. The car broke down, and a police car quickly came to our help. There were 3 policemen in the car, and the chief offered to take my dad to the nearest gas station, where he could find a mechanic, and told the other 2 officers to stay with our car. My dad says they seemed absolutely not pleased with the order until the chief told them, "Don't worry, there's a woman and 2 children." That seemed to calm the 2 officers. Driving to the gas station in the police car, my dad asked the chief what was all that about. The chief told him that there had been many accidents in that part of the road. That's why they were able to find our car so quickly. All of the accidents involved young men traveling without female or child company. Those who had survived said that they crashed because they could see a very beautiful woman next to the road, but once they came close to her, she turned out to be just a rotting corpse staring at them, and they crashed because they were paralyzed by fear. Story 16. I worked at the Nevada nuclear test site, decommissioning old buildings. How much time do you have, Lowell? One of the creepiest days was when I was sent with an end-dump load of non-hazmat material to the general landfill, which I had never been to before. Somehow I missed the turn and ended up at an armed gate with machine guns pointed at me. Very uncomfortable. Once I explained my mistake, I was quite hastily turned around. Still not knowing exactly where my turn was, a very nondescript desert road was what I was looking for. I headed back. I turned on the next dirt road I came to and ended up at the Sedan crater. Went and smoked a cigarette on the observation deck, all by my lonesome. My hands were still shaking from the run-in with the armed guards. Another was when delivering a hazmat load to Area 25. They had begun using robots to guard the area. They were still in beta testing, and someone may have just been messing with me, but the damn thing perceived my truck as a threat and blocked my ability to move. I went inside the building, and 15 minutes later, it had moved on. Story 12. Driving through rural New Mexico, a beastie area with a crazy melted rock look. No plants or anything, just rock and sand. Monsoon time, raining cats and dogs just pouring so hard you could barely see going 20 miles per hour. Thunder and lightning just rocked the car, sometimes turning into hail and pounding you. Just a nasty storm. Came around a corner, and the whole countryside was on fire, like 20 tall flames, hundreds of yards in all directions while pouring rain at dusk. Just rocks and dirt wildly on fire in the pouring rain. Just slowly drove on. It was totally freaky and surreal. Honestly, I thought I may have hallucinated it. Checking the news, a propane truck slid off the road going way too fast and apparently busted open pretty violently and lit on fire. Never saw the truck. Must have been behind something. Felt a bit bad after not stopping. Story 13. FedEx contractor. I'm in one of those big box trucks. Anyway, I finished a long delivery day, and I swear to whatever gods you believe in that I was hearing voices in my cab. It wasn't the radio. It wasn't my tinnitus. It wasn't my subconscious. I was hearing whispered voices in my right ear that were coming from the passenger seat. The voices continued even after I had gotten back to my hub, clocked out, and hopped in my own car to go home. They only stopped when I left the parking lot. It only happened that night. I still have no idea what the hell it was, because I had ruled everything else out. Story 14. My uncle was driving between Great Falls and Helena at around 3 a.m. He had his high beams on, as it was a lonely drive and quiet highway. In the distance he saw something cross the median and started to slow his approach, thinking it was a deer. As he got closer, he realized it was standing up, so he slowed down to about 30 mm. He realized what it was and started to panic. A man in blue coveralls with a pig's head, not a mask, but literally the head of a pig on his shoulder. My uncle moved to the left lane, and as he passed, Pighead lunged at the truck. My uncle didn't stop to check if he'd grabbed on till he was in the safety of Helena. Nothing was out of the ordinary there, but on that stretch of road now, he doesn't slow down for anything. Story 10. Not a trucker, but I had a college teammate from Miami tell a story that he swears on to this day. He and his girlfriend were making the drive to Naples late at night on a 2-lane road through the Everglades and had been in a line of cars behind an 18-wheeler for multiple miles. She fell asleep and he was surfing for something to listen to on the radio. Only one station came in clearly enough to be tolerable, so he gave it a listen. The DJ came on and said something along the lines of, "The stars are extra bright in the Everglades tonight. If you're driving through there, pull off and take a look." He said he normally wouldn't even think of it, but for some reason felt compelled to that night. He woke up his girlfriend. She was annoyed and didn't want to, but he convinced her it would be worth it. They stopped and just took in the stars for 5-10 minutes. He said it was the most amazing sky he's ever seen. They get back on the road, drive another few minutes, and come across a massive accident. The truck they were following had jackknifed and took out a handful of vehicles that were following. He said there were multiple fatalities, but I've never been able to find a new story about it to confirm. Probably would have been in 2005-ish. They most likely would have been involved if not for that random DJ on the only radio station to come in that night. Story 11. Driving through a national park in the middle of the night, going through a slow stretch at about 30 kilometers per hour. Every so often, I think I see something out the window and beside me. Just a glimpse of movement. When I look, though, I don't catch it. Finally, on about the third time, I whip my head around, and this time I recognize it's a huge black wolf following alongside my truck just off the highway. I only saw it for a few seconds before I had to focus back on the road, but it was absolutely lovely, yet unsettling. I'm gonna say what everyone else here will, black dog phenomenon. Unless you know for sure it was actually a black wolf, it means you need to pull over and get some sleep 5 minutes ago. Story 7. Not the middle of nowhere, but a trash route in a pretty rural area. We were at a stop loading trash when a pickup stopped behind us. A petite woman in scrubs that were covered in blood got out and asked for directions to Lake Jack Nolan. She said there was a deer that had been hit by a truck and she had been sent to remove the remains. She never said who sent her, but she wasn't moving a deer anywhere at her size. We gave her directions and sent her on her way. We all said we wondered if she was going to dump a body or something. She was already covered in blood in a nice truck and was supposed to be on her way to move roadkill that was far too heavy for her to handle. Then we went back to work. Story 8. Not sure if this story is creepy, but it's definitely scary. My father was a truck driver in East Africa in the 80s and early 90s. During the years leading up to the Rwandan genocide, my father was passing through Rwanda. He reached a checkpoint and was forcibly removed from his truck at gunpoint. Apparently, he looked like he belonged to the Tutsi tribe, and they put him in a cage with other Tutsi prisoners. He tried communicating that he isn't Rwandan, but no one spoke the same language as him. Every night they would take about 5 people from the cage and slaughter them in front of him. After the third night, he saw a man that spoke a little bit of Swahili, which my dad spoke, and told him that he was not Rwandan and showed him his ID. Somehow, that guy got him out and he was handed the keys to his truck and was on his way. Story 9. My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right and saw a woman with a Miss Trunchbull bun, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knows how to react, the car pulls off at the next exit, and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About half an hour later, a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad, with the same woman in the passenger seat, with the same expression on her face. My dad thinks of this and plans to pull into the next services to report that even if it's nothing, misunderstanding, better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details. plates, etc., and he thinks there is no point calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman, same Miss Trunchbull hair, same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window, so my dad pulls over into a lay-by and calls the police. Apparently, they have received 3 other calls about the same woman car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic, as he never heard anything more about it, but he didn't see her again, and although he kept an eye on the news, didn't see anything about it. Hopefully, it's just a giant coincidence. Who knows? Story 5 used to do deliveries. Not actually a truck driver, though. I used to have this regular that was out in the boondocks, 25 million plus out of the way of civilization, and smack dab in the middle of 2 large towns. I would drive this route maybe once a month, and would always pass at least one car driving towards me due to the sheer length of the drive. There was a small group of old houses on this route that were really broken down, and I had never seen anyone around them in 6+ months of driving the route. Always assumed they were vacant because they didn't look livable. Well, I was driving out to this customer one fall afternoon. Had been driving for a very long time without seeing a single car drive towards me. Finally drive past the abandoned houses, and there's one old lady in her front yard pushing an old manual grass cutter, but she stops in her tracks as I drive towards her. I took it as a sign I was speeding or something and slowed down. I took a quick glance in my rearview mirror after passing by, and she was staring straight at me. She dropped the grass cutter and turned 180 pounds to do this. It was just very odd, and definitely set off my spidey sense. Never saw her again or anyone else on that route by those houses in the 10 months I drove it. Story 6. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains, Minnesota area. One night, around 2 a.m., I was hauling across North Dakota trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I'd been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows that it is incredibly flat, like really flat. There also tend to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road that are far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane, approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was some retread off a blown tire. As I got closer, I noticed it was 2 people laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came to an almost complete stop, but they didn't move, not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old graybeard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the road layers, along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes, will beat the brakes out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the 2 people on the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old graybeard, I got to keep my truck, my job, and my teeth. Story 3 Trucker here. I think the best creepy thing that ever happened to me was when I was heading from Tucson, Arizona, up to Salt Lake City, Utah. Well, this was a few years ago, and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood and was under construction, so I had to take a weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. Well, it was getting late, and I was getting tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. Now this was in the middle of nowhere. The closest town was like 40 miles away, so it was completely pitch black outside once I turned the lights off. Anyway, around 4 a.m., I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my truck. like playing with the air and power cables between my cab and the trailer, which is literally 6 inches from where my head is, but on the outside of the cab. Then I felt something climb onto the landing that's on the back of my truck, and it shakes my whole truck. So I'm guessing something around 200 to 300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point, I'm wide awake, and I want to get this thing away from me. So I slam my hand into my cab wall, trying to scare whatever is out there. Slam is hard enough to really make it loud. I then hear someone, a male, scream bloody murder, and I hear them fall off the back of my truck. I then hear about 15 other people all around my truck yelling. I climb up front, turn on my lights, and illuminate a squad of Army reserves doing their midnight ruck march and capture drills. Turns out these guys were supposed to go find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight drills. That truck was 3 miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there and thought I was part of the drill. I'm ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test and legit was just there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio to their CO and tell him I was there and not have the other squads bother me. Story 4. Parked off an exit ramp at about 3 a.m. for 10 hours. The moon was full and high, and I spotted an unmistakably human figure in a nearby cut cornfield. A little spooky, but I just wrote it off as an old-timer putting up a scarecrow for the grandkids. Started watching a few YouTube videos before turning in and out of the corner of my vision. I thought I saw movement. I shut my lights off to get a good look, saw the figure but nothing else. I couldn't be sure, but it looked like maybe it was in a different spot, maybe a little closer even. I was definitely feeling a bit spooked. The highway was devoid of anyone besides a car passing every 10 minutes or so. I didn't want to, but I had to jump out to pee. I considered a bottle, but I told myself I was being childish. I took a look at the figure, and it was right where I figured it should be. I hop out, walk between my truck and trailer, and start leaking. Every fiber of my being wanted to look. I told myself again I was being foolish, but I couldn't help it. I looked out. The field was empty. The figure wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I pinched off and jumped back in. I took off down the highway, didn't give one crap about a violation. Stopped 40 minutes up the road at a well-lit and very full Love's. Haven't stopped on a ramp since.